Good evening and a very warm welcome to our latest webinar. My name is Katie Williams and I'm Technical Manager at Dengie. This evening I'm delighted to be joined by two very special guests, Sylvia Ormiston and Lizzie Briant. I'll introduce them properly in just a few minutes, but first I'm going to outline the plan for this evening. So firstly, I'm going to actually set the scene with some concepts of nutrition for breeding stock with a particular focus on native breeds. Sylvia is then going to follow along with the practical aspects of breeding, and then Lizzie is going to discuss showing with the use of some great case study examples, which I know you're going to find really interesting. If questions have come in and there's time, we'll do a Q&A session at the end, and I have my Dengie colleague Tracy Hammond behind the scenes. So if you do have any Dengie sort of nutrition related questions, please do pop them in the Q&A and Tracy will answer them throughout the evening as well. If you are asking questions, if you can use the Q&A function rather than chat, it does mean that if we don't get a chance to respond to them tonight, we can follow up. Once the webinar ends, we lose the chat details, but we can access the Q&A. So we'll happily answer questions tomorrow if we don't get them covered off this evening. The evening is being recorded, so Sylvia and Lizzie are happy for us to record them. So it will be available for you to view again at your leisure, and information about that will come out in the next day or so. Generally speaking, if you go to our Dengie YouTube channel and click on the videos tab, you will find all our webinars that we've run this season and in previous years as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests this evening, and we couldn't wish for two lovelier people to be with us. Sylvia Ormiston is stud manager at the Royal Balmoral Stud, and for me works in one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's not without its challenges though, and some of the photos you're going to see this evening give some insight into just the day-to-day challenges and issues that Sylvia faces managing the ponies there. Sylvia has so much knowledge and experience of breeding and producing Highlands, and I'm incredibly grateful that she's given up her time to share that knowledge with us, especially given the fact that they've been having power cuts all week, because I think most of Scotland's been battered by the storm. So thank you, Sylvia, for that. Lizzie must be one of the most successful producers of native ponies ever, I imagine, with winning at Hoys, Olympia, etc. And as an example of her sort of dedication and belief in the sort of rare breeds and the native breeds, back in 2013, she kindly drove ponies all the way from Wiltshire to the Royal Norfolk Show, where I was accumulating 40 breeds to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Rare Breed Survival Trust. So it just demonstrates the passion and enthusiasm for these ponies that both Sylvia and Lizzie have. I think the fact that both of them have worked for the or supported the royal household for many years speaks volumes about their passion and enthusiasm for what they do too, and the professionalism with which they do it. So I'm delighted that they both continue to choose to work with us here at Dengie as well. But Lizzie and Sylvia, if you're happy to get a cuppa while I kick off, I'm going to just cover the sort of principles and set the scene a little bit with feeding breeding stock first, and then we'll come to Sylvia in just a few minutes time. So hopefully you can all see my screen okay. Sorry, there's actually Sylvia and Lizzie, as if you didn't know them. So the brood mare, really, we're starting with covering, and general advice, and this is a lot easier said than done, I'm well aware, is that the mare should be fit, not fat. What that's trying to replicate is the rising plane of nutrition that we would see in the natural environment. So you come out of the winter being a little bit leaner, the good grass starts to come through with the warmer weather and conditions, and you start to naturally put on weight and condition. And therefore you're, in the context of a mare, more receptive to conceiving and holding a pregnancy. Now, with a good doer, that is quite hard to achieve. So very often we're actually trying to achieve weight loss before we approach covering and hopefully a conception. But if we can aim for a body condition score of around 2.5 to 3 on the 5-point scale, it gives us a better chance of achieving conception. Now, deficiencies of any nutrients in any context are often the things that compromise health or fertility or even performance, but there isn't in the literature any real evidence to show that supplying above requirements is beneficial. So as long as you're meeting what an animal needs, then there is very little evidence to show that as you over-exceed or oversupply, that you're actually going to increase your chances of performing better or increase your chances of conception. And that's a fundamental principle we try to apply in all situations, really. So yes, deficiencies cause problems. You need to meet requirements, but exceeding really or rarely has any beneficial effect whatsoever. So that's really what we're trying to do, is aim for that optimal level in the middle. So assuming we've actually had a successful conception, what are the factors that contribute to sort of fetal growth? And again, you know, feeding more doesn't necessarily create a bigger foal, and that's not always a desirable thing anyway. But effectively, the fetus is growing linearly during the sort of gestation period until you get to the sort of second half, or in particular last trimester, and that's when it gains around 75% of its final birth weight. So we talk about that final trimester as when the energy and the nutrient requirements really significantly step up. And I've always sort of joked about it in terms of human context, because for a pregnant woman, the increased energy requirement really only contributes, or is often equated to, an extra slice of bread and butter. Now, I always joke with friends and relatives, it's how thick you spread the butter that has a real impact on your calorie intake, but it's the same sort of principle. We're really not supplying or needing much more than maintenance for the pregnant mare for the majority of her pregnancy. Obviously, nutritional status of the mare will have an impact. If she's already underweight and in poor condition, then you're trying to feed her up, and then in that case you are going to feed her more because she needs to gain weight. But in a healthy weight mare at the start, you really aren't using a lot more energy than they would need for maintenance. The age of the mare and the health of the mare are two factors that can I suppose, reduce the ability or the effectiveness with which nutrients transfer from the mare to the fetus. So as a mare ages, there are degenerative changes in the endometrium, and that really can impact on the supply of nutrients that don't transfer across to the fetus particularly well. And it tends to be why you will start to see an older mare producing smaller foals in some cases. But general health can have an impact as well. So endometritis, again, for the same sorts of reasons, if you're got an inflammation of the endometrium where the transfer of nutrients is occurring, it's going to compromise that process. So it is really important for us to try and keep the mare as healthy as possible. And obviously, people use their judgment as to how long they would breed from a mare and for how many years and into what sort of old age you would keep trying your luck. So traditional stud feeds used to be what we would feed the pregnant mare, but they are around 15 to 16% sort of crude protein. Energy values are similar to conditioning feeds, and they tend to be cereal based. So very often a stud mix would be based on oats, and stud cubes would have a high cereal content too, because they're pretty much designed for, say, the thoroughbred sector, and certainly maybe sports horses and things more so than native breeds. And they would be fed for pregnancy around 2.5 to 3 kilos a day, which is in the region of 2 to 3 scoops. They would provide way too much energy for many horses, not just natives these days, because we do seem to have a tendency for obesity and certainly overweight animals in the UK. As we get warmer and they're using less energy to keep warm and to sort of maintain their weight and condition, and grass is growing all year round more and more frequently, so there's energy there for them throughout the year, and the need for supplementary feed is definitely reduced in terms of energy. But obviously we do need to supply some essential vitamins and minerals that are required both for the mare to remain healthy and the fetus as well. And this slide really is to try and give you the I suppose some facts and figures, but just to really show the principle or the difference between things like a balancer versus a traditional stud feed, or even for that matter a low energy mix, because very often people think, well, I don't need the full hit of a stud feed, so I'll just use a low energy mix or cube, like a cool mix or something like that. But what those feeds tend to give you, and especially if you then use a reduced rate compared to what the recommended feeding rate is, because again a native pony probably still doesn't even need the full amount of a low energy cool mix. But you can see here I've taken a key mineral that's really important for breeding stock and young stock, which would be copper. It's really important for things like tendon elasticity, helping to reduce the risk of DOD, developmental orthopedic disease. Now, if we were using 3 kilos, which is a lot of a sort of cool mix, you would be getting about 105 milligrams of copper per day from that feeding rate. Excuse me. And because the energy is around 10 megajoules per kilo, digestible energy, it's giving you 30 megajoules per day. Now, what a stud balancer, and for that matter, all balancers do, is take the energy out, but they still give you a really concentrated form of all those essential vitamins and minerals. So in this case, we're looking at copper. It's got 225 milligrams per kilo, and you're only feeding 0.9 kilos per day. So that's giving you basically double the level of copper that that low energy mix would give you. Now, again, when you look at the energy value per kilo in a balancer, it looks really high, but actually because you're only using 900 grams or 0.9 of a kilo, it's about 1/3 of the energy that you would get if you were using the recommended feeding rate of a cool mix. So I hope that just in a few facts and figures gives you an insight as to why we use these stud balancers. It gives you everything, or high good levels, if you like, of the things you do want, so the copper, the minerals, and much lower levels of the calories or the energy, the bits that you don't want when we're trying to feed a good doer. So why are minerals important during pregnancy? Well, some work back in the 90s really demonstrated that copper supplementation of mares resulted in a significant reduction of epiphysitis, so the inflammation of the growth plates. And what I suppose was really interesting about that study is that when they fed the foals themselves from mares that hadn't received any copper supplementation, the problem still occurred. So it wasn't that you could say, okay, well, let's not worry about the mare, we'll just feed the foal when it arrives and it'll get the copper it needs. There was something about feeding the mares during pregnancy that actually meant the foal was better able to then grow and develop properly, and was therefore less likely to develop a developmental issue. And it's basically demonstrating that when we're feeding the fetus or the foal in utero, it's actually accumulating mineral stores whilst it's inside the mare that then support it once it's born. And the reason that this is really important is however much we sort of feed the mare and try to feed the foal once it's born, we just can't get enough into it to actually support the rate of growth that it's going through in those first few months. So it needs to have its own reserves so that it can call upon them when it's growing at its most rapidly. What happens if we don't feed the mare during pregnancy? Well, for some number of pregnancies, maybe 1 or 2, possibly even more, you might well get away with it because she's actually depleting her own reserves to meet the needs of the fetus. But what tends to happen, and especially in mares that are sort of bred from repeatedly and in quick succession without having a break from pregnancies, then you may find a developmental orthopedic disease or DOD problem later down the line. And that's because she's over a prolonged period of time depleted her own reserves. We're not replenishing it because we're not feeding her when she needs it. And therefore that may start to compromise what she's able to pass to the fetus. And therefore when it's born, it hasn't got those reserves in place to help it grow and develop properly. Now, quality of forage will also play a part in this as well. So there may be some years that you might get away with not feeding or not doing as much in the way of feeding because the forage quality is better. And by that, it could be the grass or it could be the hay or haylage or whatever you happen to be using alongside. So again, that the levels will vary, climatic conditions, obviously weather, all those sorts of factors, where you buy your forage from if you're bringing it in, and they will all bear a part to play in this whole process of where the mare's getting her nutrition from. And I do appreciate that feeding a large herd of breeding stock is potentially quite expensive, particularly with the balancers. So if cost is an issue, then there are mineralized licks that you can put out in the field in buckets, and they can access them free choice. I mean, obviously the downside to that is that you can't necessarily monitor in a group who's having what and how much of each thing they're having, but as a sort of safety net, it's a good idea to allow them access to a mineralized lick so they can top up if they need it. So if we've had a successful pregnancy and we actually get to the point where the mare is lactating, it's interesting to note that the mare will produce between 2 to 3.5 kilos of milk per 100 kilos body weight per day. So she is generating a lot of nutrition for that foal. That's around 10 to 17.5 kilos of milk for a 500 kilo mare. And it's always interesting when we look at them in the context of other species as well, because the mare has a relatively small udder. And the foal is having to suckle frequently and very frequently to try and get the energy it requires from the milk. So Sylvia is going to talk a little bit later on about the repercussions if the foal doesn't suckle from the mare, and they can happen very fast, because as soon as that energy isn't going in, it certainly is going to weaken the foal's immunity and all sorts of energy levels, etc., and resilience to disease. Peak lactation tends to occur between the 2nd and 3rd month of lactation, and that is often when the milk quality in terms of energy is there's lots there, but you might not have the same level of minerals coming through, so they might actually be diluted by the sheer volume of milk. So again, that's when we might want to, if we're seeing any possible signs of a rapidly growing foal or some form of DOD, this is when it can quite often first become apparent, because there's a lot of energy stimulating the growth rate, but the minerals are becoming more dilute, and it's the minerals that basically help to build a sound, solid framework and structure of the skeleton. So some supplemental feed for the foal may be useful at that point. Now, the mare can consume a huge amount of grass when they're lactating, and they're probably one of the highest consumers in a situation where they're allowed free choice access to pasture. So it may be 3 to possibly even 3.5% of body weight per day, and that's on a dry matter basis. So if we consider that grass is only about 20% dry matter and 80% water, they may actually eat anywhere in the region of 80 to 90 kilos of grass, as we would see it in the field, which is, it's a huge amount. If you think a bag of feed is typically 20 kilos, it's equivalent of 4, maybe 4.5 of those bags. So when you put it into context, it's a huge volume of feed. And obviously a bigger mare might even consume more, because that's roughly for a 500 kilo mare. When energy intake is below what the mare needs, then there may not be any impact on the foal if she's able to mobilise her own fat stores to support the milk production. So we often talk about mare milking off her back, and that just means that she's converting her own energy reserves and putting it into the milk if we're not able to supply her with enough to meet her requirements. So a good mare will often milk off her back, and some of the more selfish ones keep the fat for themselves and maybe just not produce so much milk for the foal. But obviously, if we are starting with a thin mare, and that tends to be less common in native breeds, but it does happen, then you may impact the foal's growth rate because of the shortage of milk, because she hasn't got her own reserves to pass on. So that's something to bear in mind. More of an issue in the thoroughbred sector, I have to say, and not such a big issue for our native breeds. I always find this slide fascinating because it's a really timely reminder to think about the amount of water there actually is in milk. It's about 90%. So the most important thing we need to allow our lactating mare access to is a good supply of water. So that's rule number one, and a very basic rule. But I always find it interesting as well that when we look at lactose, which is the sugar in the milk, and it's 6%, so it's relatively high, whereas the fat content is very low. So what it shows us is that foals are actually reliant on a more sugary diet and less fat in order to grow. And that reflects the diet of the horse. When we think about grass and plant species that the horse would have access to in its natural environment, they're actually quite low, or very low in fats and oils. The energy is coming from sugars and obviously fibre. So it's always worth bearing that in mind that it starts even back to the milk composition, that the horse is actually quite in tune with a sugar-based rather than a fat-based diet. Now we know as they get older and mature that too much sugar is obviously a bad thing, but in principle, sugar is what they've evolved to function on. And I just put this in for a little bit of interest, really, that the mare's milk is very low in fat, and only the white rhino has been found to be lower in fat. Now, I'm not sure who was brave enough to milk a white rhino to actually do the sample and test it, but I'm assuming that she was unconscious at the time. And equally, it's also very interesting that human and cow milk is around 2 to 4 times higher than horse's milk in fat content. So again, the difference. Obviously, cows have been artificially bred to have a high fat content, clearly, because that's to our taste. But you can see why it's to our taste, because human milk will have a higher fat content. And until health values and principles wanting a lower fat content probably changed, we were craving or enjoy a higher fat content milk. And I remember enjoying Gold Top when I was much younger. So yeah, just some interesting facts of other species. In terms of what that means for the composition and the type of fat in the milk, then we know that grass is rich in the form of fat that we refer to as omega-3. And compared to non-herbivorous monogastrics, so that might be chickens, etc. Obviously chicken doesn't have milk, but pigs even would be better. I was just thinking monogastrics. A horse milk is higher compared to those non-herbivorous monogastrics. What happens when we change the mare's diet to cereals, and this is more relevant to perhaps the thoroughbred and sports sector, where we put a higher level of cereal into their ration, they're much higher in what we call omega-6 fatty acids. So it's going to have a potential impact on foal health, that we're changing the type of fat that's coming through. Yes, there's not very much, and we know there's not very much in the adult horse's ration typically, but we do know that when we switch away from omega-3 to omega-6, we're tending to put the body into a more inflammatory condition or state. So that's always something to bear in mind. If we can keep them on forages and grasses and top up with essential vitamins and minerals, we're going to be far more likely to replicate the natural composition of milk than when we start to use ingredients that don't reflect that. And it does emphasize the importance of when these foals are born. So in the natural environment, you sort of see the foals in the New Forest and on Exmoor sort of May, June time. When we try to bring them early and breed them artificially early, there isn't so much grass available. It's typically not making such a big contribution to the energy requirement or the diet of the horse, and therefore we tend to use more supplementary feed. And again, thoroughbreds will start foaling very early, Jan, Feb time of year, and they can be fed a high proportion of cereal-based feeds because they're not turned out to grass. The weather and etc. isn't conducive to that. So when we do that, we do need to be aware of what impact we're having on things like the omega-3 intake. So feeding the lactating mare, we've sort of talked about the sorts of things that you need, or the reasons you might need to feed supplementary feed at higher levels. Yes, when you foal out of season, or if you have a poor doer mare and she's not milking particularly well, you don't have to default to a cereal-based feed. There are still options available that are based on fibre and oil and give you a comparable energy level to those traditional stud feeds if you want them. And if they're based on fibre and oil, they would typically be low in starch, and in some cases as much as 10 times as low. In the traditional stud feeds, it's not unusual to see starch levels of 25–30%, whereas something like an alpha A oil, where you've got alfalfa and oil as the energy sources, the starch level is about 2%. So it's phenomenally different and well worth looking at that. You can feed it alongside a stud balancer, so you're still getting all those vitamins and minerals, but your energy is actually coming from fibre and oil by doing that. So if we look at the foal, moving on, what we're trying to achieve is a consistent, steady rate of growth. And if there's one thing that I find particularly interesting and useful, is plotting the growth rates of some of the foals and young stock that we work with. We've done it with varying sort of types and shapes and sizes, and it's perfectly possible to support even a big warm blood on a fibre-based ration and achieve a nice consistent growth curve. There's a lot of myth about how you have to use traditional sort of stud mixes and cues for these big horses, so that is most definitely not the case. The most rapid growth is in those first 6 months, and then the rate of growth will tend to slow, but they are still growing. It's just at a slower rate. What we're trying to avoid, and when you plot your graph, if you're new to breeding or having a youngster, it's well worth doing, because if the graph is going very steeply upright, it's a good indication that they're growing very fast. Now, you may want to actually increase things like the vitamins and minerals as a result of that, because if the foal is growing very quickly, you need to put more of the components in that help it develop that strong structure to base its growth on. But equally, if the growth is very flat, so it's almost horizontal across the graph, assuming you've got your time or age along the bottom and your weight across up the y-axis, you've got it the right way around. So if it's very flat, it means it may not be getting enough energy. And if you're doing it regularly, you may well be able to spot issues or problems, whether the mare's not milking enough or if the foal's got some underlying condition, and you can spot those if maybe the clinical signs in the foal aren't immediately obvious to you. So well worth doing, and a really interesting exercise for your own interest, particularly, as I say, if you've not bred many young stock before. So again, the foal is going to be consuming a lot of milk, around 20 to 25% of its body weight in milk per day. And energy is really that first limiting factor to growth. If it's not able to get enough milk, then its growth rate will be slowed. Both a low energy and a high energy, and therefore the subsequent growth rates, will increase the risk of disease. And we tend to associate growth problems with a rapidly growing foal. But if you have a delayed growth rate, what can happen is that the foal will do compensatory growth at a later time. So once it's better or over its illness, it will suddenly shoot up, and it's that spurt or sudden change in growth rate that can actually be as big a risk for developmental issues occurring. So neither of these scenarios is that desirable. Obviously, balance is essential. We've slipped to Suffolk foal and mare, sorry. It's a native breed, but not quite a pony, but it's a very cute shot. Protein, so essential amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. They're what the foal is going to need to develop tissues like muscle. And the one that is most commonly talked about is lysine. So it's the first limiting amino acid. And if we don't supply enough lysine, then it will slow the rate of growth. Now, historically, and this is going back, 30, 40 years nearly now, if we fed lots of crude protein, it was generally considered to be okay. But actually, what we can do better now and more efficiently is get the level of lysine right, and then the crude protein requirement is no longer as high as it used to be. So again, targeting, using the right quality of feed is really important. If you, by law, we have to put just a crude protein value on a bag of feed, you might get a lysine declaration, and then you can use the ingredients list to give you an indication of the quality of the protein that's in that feed as well. So things like alfalfa or soybean meal usually indicate a good quality protein source. So they're the sorts of things, ingredients that you'd be looking for in a stud balancer. We've talked about the impact of the time of year of foaling, and obviously that then continues once the foal really starts to develop the ability to eat grass and digest forages more effectively, which tends to happen around 3 to 4 months. That's when the bacterial population or microbes in the gut that the horse relies on to digest fibre really start to become established. And from around 3 to 4 months on, if for some reason you had to wean the foal, they could be on a forage and sort of what we'd call an adult ration would support them. Prior to that, if you lost a mare or you needed to wean, you would be looking at something like a milk-based crete pellet to support them. So from that 3 to 4 months, it depends when that occurs or in the year. So again, if they're born early, they hit the 3 to 4 month period in the spring when the grass is lush, but equally it might be later in the year if they're a later foal and the grass quality isn't so good, maybe in August time. If it's been a very dry summer, there might not be so much grass available to them. So all of those factors will have an impact on how much energy and supplementary feed the foal's going to need. And obviously the weather conditions will have an impact impact on the energy they use to keep warm, yes, but also actually to keep cool. And heat stress is quite a big issue for young stock. They use a lot of energy trying to keep cool as well as keeping warm. So they're all things to just think about. Say foal creep pellets typically will have a milk base to them, and they are what you need for those first 3 months if you need to use some supplementary feed. Although this work was done in thoroughbreds, it just makes the point neatly, really, that animals will catch up. So, and I find this a bit with my vegetables, when I try and stagger them and put them 2 weeks apart and everything in my sowing, by the time I put them out in the summer, they all just kind of come to maturity and all come ripe at once. So despite your best made plans, however hard you try, very often they'll catch up. There's this like kind of compensatory growth effect. So by day 150, there is no difference apparent. So even if you start with a lower body weight with an early foal, they catch up by the time they've actually reached 150 days of age. And it really does suggest again why those early foals might be at greater risk of developing DOD, because that faster growth rate is the sort of one of the contributing factors that could cause us problems. So, the more we mess with nature and how things should be sort of naturally done, the greater the risk we have of problems and the closer the attention to detail needs to be to avoid them. I've probably preempted most of that. So yes, 3 to 4 months is when the change occurs. We've also got the evidence to show that cereal-based rations do increase the risk of DOD in young stock. And again, apologies because most of this work is done in thoroughbreds, but the principles are the same. Non-structural carbohydrates, so that's the combination of your sugars and starch effectively, when fed to young stock, in this case thoroughbred weanlings, actually created a more insulin resistant animal than weanlings that were on fat and fibre. And that's a really important concept for breeds predisposed to obesity, insulin dysregulation, EMS and laminitis. So it probably is a little bit of a leap to say that it definitely happens in native breeds, but the principles are there, and it's certainly something we should be mindful of. And the more we can use fibres, and if we need that extra energy, that we'll, rather than relying on cereal-based feeds, again, it's that risk reduction strategy that's important. And we also know that if we feed the mare high levels of cereals, it's affecting the glucose and insulin dynamics in the foal. And this has been shown in humans and other species as well. So what we sometimes think of a genetic predisposition to something like EMS or laminitis may well actually just be because of what we've been feeding those mares during their pregnancy, rather than actually a genetic contribution. So it's just something to think about. Key issues, it's not high protein. People still sort of associate growth problems and DOD with a high protein diet. It's not the case that protein is the sole sort of contributing factor to it. We know that high energy, particularly in the case of using cereals where there's low mineral intake, is a big issue. So you've got the worst case scenario, putting lots of high energy feeds in there, making them grow very quickly and not supporting it. But equally, you can have a sort of lower energy diet and not give them minerals and things, and that can also be a risk factor. So minerals are key, and say not high protein as previously thought. Clearly, DOD, like most equine nutrition related diseases, is multifactorial. Not all horses or foals on the same diet get problems, just as not every horse in the same field succumbs to some other issues. So you need to just obviously bear in mind that there are other factors, and sometimes, however good your diet and your management, there's some genetic predisposition that you can't control. So really, that's just a summary of how we go about trying to avoid DOD. Ensuring your diet is balanced is key, using your fibre and your fat, and if you can use monitoring closely as a sort of early warning system, all to the good. And do be aware of the sort of seasonal fluctuation in the nutritional content of the forages you use. So grass will vary quite considerably throughout the season, and if you get a flush at any time and the weather is less predictable these days, that can be enough energy to suddenly result in a growth spurt. So do watch for that as well. Traditionally, I think, and sadly, these sort of foals with DOD ended up being starved pretty much and shut up in the stable with hay and water. Yes, fibre is important, so generally speaking, it's usually hay. If you can hand graze them so that it's controlled and that they don't then make the situation worse by careering around a field, that's great. And in these cases, supply vitamins and minerals. Again, you have to be careful using different analogies, but if a child had a growth issue, rickets or something, we would give them extra vitamin D, or make sure at least that their vitamin D was met, rather than not giving them anything at all. And it's in these scenarios where we can use the balancers, and if they're under 3 months, there are some great products out there that are really concentrated sources of minerals you can target the foal direct with. And if anyone's sort of interested in those sorts of things, we can certainly give you some pointers in the right direction for those products. But it is important to support them. Repair and recovery requires nutrients for that to be achieved. So starving them and shutting them up in a stable with nothing is not going to help the situation. And in some extreme cases, and usually done under veterinary supervision, you may well need to wean the foal early or try to restrict their milk intake. And this can occur often when you're crossing breeds, and the mare's a really prolific milker with perhaps more of a finer foal. And equally, if you are putting an orphaned foal onto something like a native breed, because they're usually very good at mothering orphans and things, she may be producing a lot more milk than the foal would naturally have received from its own mother. So again, that can be a bit of a higher risk scenario. So just bear all of those things in mind when embarking on breeding. So that's an overview of some of the key issues we're thinking about when we come to feeding the broodmare and the youngster. And if Sylvia's there, if she turns her camera and microphone on, I'm going to turn mine off. But Sylvia, it's over to you on the practical aspects of feeding breeding stock.
Thank you so much, Katie. Can I just say thank you very much for inviting myself and Lizzie to talk this evening and be part of this webinar. Very interesting so far, highly technical, and you're such a clever lady. But thank you so much for this, and I'd just like to introduce you into a little piece of our life. So first of all, if we just meet the team, there's 3 of us that look after approximately 40 to 45 ponies, depending on the time of year and what we have at the moment. So there's Kim, who's sitting on Mayfly, then there's myself, and then there's Rebecca. So stud groom, stud manager, and working pony groom. And we're all based on the very bonny Balmoral estate. And Katie is in control of the slides, and she is very much going to work with me as we go here. Next slide, Katie, please. So just a quick picture of the Queen's lovely estate, the castle at Balmoral, and we are very blessed to have the chance to work here, and we'd like to share our blessings by showing some lovely pictures. In the next image, you'll see Kim with a lovely bunch of young fillies in the front of the castle, and these are just a bunch of young fillies that are up and coming into the working group and also into the breeding group at some point. And as you can see, they're just very loving, want to be in our company all the time. It's all part and parcel of what we're trying to breed in the temperament of this fabulous native pony. The next picture we have is of Rebecca with Balmoral Gearin with the panniers on. And this is just showing part of what our ponies are actually, part of the job our ponies are expected to do and what we breed them for. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we have the reason why what we're doing, our aims and objectives, are to breed a type, a trainable and hardy Highland pony that has a sensible brain and sound conformation. Now, before anybody says anything about a Highland pony and how sparkly it has to be in the show ring or whatever, I'm afraid that is not what a Highland pony is in our eyes. A Highland pony has to have a brain first and foremost, and if we can't work with that brain, they don't do our job. So breeding the sensible brain and the sound conformation, which obviously is part and parcel of being able to walk up a hill, we also try to breed a similar stamp of pony. So our next image is of a group of youngsters, again, just head over the fence, and they are quite difficult to tell apart, apart from the fact that they're all smiling, of course, with the ears forward. I think the carrots or a bucket of feed was quite close by, and it's always but they're always very attentive and paying attention to when we call them to the gates. So where does this temperament and type tend to come from? It has to start somewhere, and between the mares, we've been talking about the mares up till now, but actually there's a lot to do with the boys as well. So if we don't have the manageable brains within the stallions also, then it tends to be that the breeding doesn't really work. We have to try and keep the brain of the boys and the brain of the ladies together as sensible as we can to keep that beautiful brain coming. Balmoral Squire, the yellow dun stallion, actually my image is out of date because actually they've just turned 5 years old. So we've got Squire and Major, a couple of young boys who are quite closely bred, but they're slightly different in their type. One's slightly more pony, both with beautiful bone, and the fact that I can lead them, or the girls can lead them in from the field, one in either hand. They field together, they buddy together, they've grown up together. The only time that they're separated is when they're actually breeding with their mares, where we keep them over the fence from one another, but they still are in close proximity. The next image you'll see when they're in their winter release, and they are very comfortable in that condition. As you can see, the snow is quietly sitting on their back. They're very, very well insulated. We very rarely have jackets on ponies here, and usually if we do, it's purely to keep their backs dry if we're riding. And it's usually just a lightweight jacket if it needs to, but our ponies are all out. We're all as natural as possible. And as you can see, the boys are just living. That was last year in the snow. We haven't quite had that much snow yet. We're just waiting for it. We're waiting for something else other than wind at the moment. And then if we can go on to the next image, please, Katie, you'll see that this is an image of Balmoral Lord and Balmoral Hercules. Both of these boys were sadly taken by grass sickness in 2018. Within 2 weeks of each other, which was absolutely devastating. And we're, as an estate, but myself as well, I'm very, very active within the Equine Grass Sickness Fund and the Morden Institute to try and get to the bottom of this devastating vile disease. Katie and Dengie have been very helpful as well, trying to develop something, working together, trying to develop some form of prevention, because we can't cure it. Whatever's killing them, we can't cure it. We have to try and prevent it getting into the gut in the first place. So we're all still quietly working together and keeping these clever brains together to try and get to the bottom of this. As you can see, our stallions are kept closely together during the breeding season. They cover their mares in hand rather than running naturally, but they're able to compare notes and stand at the fence and chat to one another during mares. But once they're finished, they would be able to rejoin one another so that they don't end up fighting. Not that they would, because they're best buddies.
Can I ask
my next?
Sorry, Sylvia.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Do you want to talk a little bit about Lord in the sense of the Highlands as the RBST and the gene bank and things? Is
absolutely?
We've got the lovely picture of him there.
Absolutely. Well, in 2017, when Lord was a 3-year-old, we actually took him down to Twemlow's, and we collected from Lord. Thankfully, we collected from Lord when we did, and we had a lot of involvement with the RBST on that front too, which are, because the Highland Ponies are on the watch list for the Rare Breed Survival Trust. We are very much, as the Highland Pony Society, working closely together to try and prevent the reduction in the gene pool. So we actually had Lord down there for this. I think we was down there for about 5 weeks, because we were actually allowing export of his semen, which again, as I say, we were very lucky to have done when we did. Sadly, we didn't get that with Hercules. We weren't in time for Hercules, because we were going to collect from him at the end of the 18 season, and sadly we lost him. But we do have 2 of his sons who we've collected successfully from, and they've banked well. And so we are trying our very best to protect this breed in every way that we can. The RBST are being very, very active with us to try their very best to inform not just the Highland Pony Society, but every breed society that is struggling with their genetics, and it's all about education. We just have to keep moving forward and work with them, and we have to work together on this. So yep, have I touched enough on that, Katie? Is there anything I missed?
Perfect. As we had the picture of him, it seemed the ideal time to talk about it.
Perfect, thank you.
It's amazing he's conserved for future use, even though sadly he's no longer with us. Brilliant, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So when we go on to our next slide here, I'll just give you a heads up that this is a breeding image, so we have a warning of breeding image demonstrating our yard setup for covering mares. It's actually not about the explicit photograph, it's to show how we can do this safely. So our next image actually is a Hercules son. This is Squire with a visiting mare, and you can see that the handler on the opposite side of the fence is wearing their crash helmet, obviously, and they're safe behind the fence. The mare is safe in front of the fence, and the stallion is on the rope. It's all very controlled, it's all very safe, and it works beautifully for us. We don't tend to let any of our mares run with the stallions, but I have had a couple of mares who over time we've discovered that they don't hold if they're being covered naturally in hand. They actually have to run with the stallion, and it's almost like, I don't know whether it's maybe it's all happening in the evening in the dark, and I don't know whether they maybe are it's all a little bit more natural, but it does work. So some mares who maybe don't conceive in hand or AI, it might be better that they just let them go out and get on with it. Anyway, the next image you'll see is of a 28-day pregnancy, a 28-day scan pregnancy, which is always the scan that we like to make sure that we don't have twins. Obviously, if we've maybe had a bit of a flush of grass and the mares are doing particularly well, and I've actually had 2 cases last summer of 2 mares actually conceiving twins, but sadly both of them weren't, they didn't actually get rid of one on their own, and neither of them are actually pregnant anymore. The trouble is with the twin pregnancy is that if the pregnancy then it doesn't continue and they reabsorb, then they tend not to cycle anymore for that season. So then you wouldn't be able to get them pregnant again. In my experience, that's what's happened. So sadly, both these mares didn't get a chance to breed into this year, but we'll have a go. I'll try and have them looking quite so well, and not have them on a flush of grass. So that another little trick that I was told by a vet though was that if you do scan the mare with twins, the best way to deal with that is to naturally let them do it themselves by almost hungering them and not allowing them to eat very well after their pregnancy, so that their natural instinct to reabsorb the one that probably isn't doing so well, and they would, so it's worked obviously for people in the past, but I don't tend to like to hunger them. It's a difficult line there, but hopefully I won't have that again. But the reason that we scan is to make sure that we don't have twins. We actually have lost twins in the past before, and of course it's tragic for the mare, and it's a tragic loss for the mare, and we just we want to try and prevent that. Our next image is basically showing our girls standing in a field in the snow. They are being fed hay, supplementary hay. It's not ad lib, because I don't like my brood mares standing round a ring feeder. I worry about if they stand round a ring feeder, apart from the fact they're eating too much, that if they do have a squabble, that somebody might be kicked. So they are actually, they graze, they are fed apart. They are checked and fed morning and night, just with hay. They don't get fed until they fold. Once they fold, that's when they would end up having a small fibre feed. The next image, as Katie pops that through, you'll see that we do get a fair bit of snow, and just jokingly put that it wasn't a day to be sitting around the picnic table. It does accumulate quite well here, but it's actually a really good way to help the girls, and all of our ponies actually reduce the weight over their back through the winter time, coming on into the rise for spring. It's terribly hard to get that balance of reducing the weight without hungering them too much, because they do have to have something passing through their gut, and majority of the time when we've got this amount of snow on the ground, we have to supplement with hay. Anyway, we get on to the preparation for the new arrivals in the spring, which is always so exciting. It's we've waited for months, you've waited for over 11 months waiting for this baby to come, and we're underneath looking at the bag every day, seeing if it's getting bigger. So the next image you'll see is of a broodmare's vessel when it starts to form, and it can start to form a good month before they are due to foal. Especially when the mare's thriving, as well as our girls tend to, then the bags will start to form well in advance. So from one image to the next, you'll see that the next image actually is a well-developed vessel with signs of wax at the end of the mare's teats. They say that once the wax starts to form, that you're talking within 24 hours, and sometimes they don't wax up, which they'll catch you out, and sometimes they'll wax up for a week. So hey-ho, who knows? It's a bit of a guessing game and a lottery. But then when we do have a daytime baby, which in our next image, Serene decided she would give us an 11 o'clock baby, which was very lovely. So we didn't lose any sleep over her. And she just loved her baby, first baby for her, and she absolutely loved her. She was probably one of the most protective girls we've had. Again, joking aside, this is the one-eared foal. She wasn't. Her ear was stuck on her neck just as she came out. Just basically getting the balance there, just putting her feet out, ready to take her first step. Probably she was on her feet before Mummy got up. And this little girl's actually out doing her super job now, carrying deer with the way that she's been bred to do. Little angel. So anyway, I do have 4 checks that I do when the foal has been born. Everybody does everything their own way, but this is my way, and my first is to make sure that I've iodined the foal's navel as soon as possible after birth to prevent infection through a wet navel. My second check will be to make sure that the foal has had 500 to 600 mils of colostrum within the first 6 hours. My third check is to make sure that the foal has passed its meconium or its first poo within the first 6 hours. And the fourth is to make sure that the mare has passed its placenta within the first 6 hours. Then we can walk away to leave them to get on with what they have to do. If we don't do these checks, on my next slide, it'll explain exactly why. So the importance of the 6-hour rule is that if the mares don't cleanse their placenta properly, she can develop a toxic laminitis that can make her very sick and also prove fatal. If the foal doesn't suckle properly and receive the correct amount of colostrum, then it will have a compromised immune system, which generally needs a plasma transfusion, which is costly, unpleasant, and upsetting for both the mare and foal. If the foal does not nurse properly, then it will die. If the foal does not properly pass its first poo, then it will become very sick and it will eventually die. So the importance of the 4 checks and the 6-hour rule, if you don't get it right, chances are they're going to die. And if doing this 6-hour rule and the 4 checks can save one foal by sharing this information, then it's affected someone. It's, you know, I just feel that that is so important. So when people say, no, don't interfere, leave them alone, let them get on with it, let them nurse, I'm sorry, interfere, do the checks. If you need to feed that foal, if you need to milk that mare, if the mare doesn't want to, if it's rejecting the foal a little bit, there are ways to deal with that. But you must get the colostrum into the foal. You must get that mare to cleanse. And in the next image, you'll see the placenta. When we lay out the placenta after the foal has been born, you can see with the image here that Kim stood beside it with her legs in it. You see how large the placenta is. Now, if one small piece of that is retained, that mare will become sick and she will develop a toxic laminitis. I've seen it. I did it with my own mare. I didn't oxytocin my own mare. I was too busy dealing with another mare and I thought, no, she'll be fine, but she wasn't. And the next day she had very serious laminitis and it took her only a month, right enough. It only took her a month to get over it because we got in amongst it right away, but she shouldn't have had to go through that, and that was through my own negligence. Never again. I won't do that again in a hurry. So we lay out the placenta on the ground to make sure everything's intact. And when that's intact, I mean, it's such an amazing piece of equipment, this placenta, when you lay it out and you see just how this baby has grown within it. It's quite fascinating. So on to the next image. When I say I interfere, I interfere. The mare's recovering. That's Melody, that Lizzie, it's also Leah's mummy, who you'll see shortly. And this is me interfering because I'm going in there just to let that little baby know that we are part of its life from the very beginning. And while he's trying to get to his feet, Mother just doesn't want to get to her feet. She's just far too tired and had far too big an experience. So I've been in there just to say hi to the colt foal while Mummy gets quietly to her feet. The next image, we've got a beautiful image of Bella and her last colt that was born. Now, Bella in this image is 21 years old. And she is pretty much the basis of a lot of our babies on site. A lot of our mares, our brood mares. She's Lord's grandma, she's great grandma, she's great grandma to foals in New Zealand now. She's just such a fabulous mare. And then we go on to the next image here. You'll see one of Bella's daughters with obviously then one of Bella's granddaughters. So whilst Faith is having something to eat, probably stealing something from my pocket, then I'm getting cuddles. I'm getting cuddles with Sparkles. And again, it's just this important time of bonding with them. We are part of them. You know, we feed the mares in the morning, and the only reason that we feed them is to give us a chance to interact with the foals. It's a nice bit of fibre going through the mares, helps boost their essential milk. As Katie was saying, the amount of milk that these foals drink is incredible, and the growth rate is just phenomenal. The next image, you'll see that Bella's little Rocky, that's him playing with Kim's bun on her head while Bella's having her breakfast. But it is the best part of the job. It is such a time wasting job, but someone's got to do it. And it's us, we get the benefit to do it. I mean, it's just such a wonderful job, and to be able to share it with the girls, it's just so special. And you'll see our next image here is we were just waiting for the boss to come for a visit. So we caught up all the mummies and babies. It was a particularly warm day, and Rebecca's sitting there with her sunglasses on too. Mummies and babies all paying attention for Queen to come and see our mummies and our foals. So when we go to the next level of our training for our foals, we basically do a lot of our education comes with the mother. So on our next image here, you'll see we've got Mingley at the Highland Show with her foal Adam at the time. Excuse me. And Adam was actually named after Adam Henson when we had Countryfile here. He was born on the day that Adam Henson was here, during the day, of course. So we named him Adam, and from there you'll see onto the next image that actually Adam 5 years later stood first place at the Royal Highland Show under his own steam, which is just super. Rebecca with Adam, it's Rebecca's favourite boy. And he's been out to actually do his job on the hill. Another bit of a warning here, we've got a graphic image coming up. It's basically a deer skin, which we lay out on the floor, and we feed our young ponies. We introduce our young ponies to the job. So anybody who doesn't actually know what we do here, our ponies are bred to carry the deer from the hill that are harvested on the hill. And also to carry the pannier baskets. So we have to teach our foals and our young stock to cope with the smell of a deer, you know, a culled deer. So we have to actually, because they are a flight animal and a hunted animal, they don't like the smell of blood. It's not natural to them. So this is something that we have to introduce. You can't force them to do it. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. But if they want to do it, they become very interested. So you'll see in that image that they're actually eating from the skin. We've got some chaff on the skin, and and anybody who's a little bit worried, then they start to come in with the peer pressure because they're missing out on some chaff on the skin. And then on the next image, you'll see we've got Gairn completing his job on the hill, and that is doing the grouse panniers. The general purpose of the pannier basket is to carry the picnic to the shooting party on the hill and to carry the grouse bag home on the hill. And that's Gairn doing a very, very super job. Gairn is the son of Jingle, who Lizzie actually took to Horse of the Year show. So it just shows you that his mummy can go and do the showing side of it, but he can then go and do the working side of it. The next image we have actually is Mull with the baskets. They've actually just stopped for a pause on the hill. They've obviously had a bit of a climb in the mist, and there's Kim having a wee breather as well. Must be a very heavy picnic.
But it is so wonderful to see these breeds doing something constructive. I know, you know, some people may have mixed views on shooting and all that, but if you put that aside, the fact that these native rare breeds have a purpose in life is just, I think is really important. So it's great to see it.
Exactly, Katie. I mean, it's you know, the other main reason that our ponies work here is because they cannot access the hill with machine. And these paths have been beaten with ponies' hooves for centuries, and that is the way that they manage the forest, or the deer forest, and it is the natural way to do it, you know. it's the deer are actually culled in a very, very controlled manner, and they don't even know they're out in the natural. It's not like they have to go to an abattoir or anything. So it's a very humane way of managing it. And the ponies are very natural out there as well. This is our inspection day for the boss. And the girls are all lined up, ready with the ponies all nice and clean. As you can see, we don't just have Highland ponies, we've actually got some halflingers and some fetal ponies. Halflingers native to Austria, but native, and are also particularly good doers. So we have to keep the weight tapes coming out on a regular basis for them too. But they all do the job, and they've all got such a wonderful, wonderful brain to do the job. The next image is actually of them preparing for the job. They're all ready to go out with their deer tack on, and again they're all just lined up under the canopy, ready to go. But I dare say one of my favourite pictures from a couple of years ago has got to be the next image of the girls going out riding lead with the ponies. So we tend to ride one, lead two, and sometimes lead three. But they all join up together, and they're all very comfortable to join together, and they can walk, trot and canter down the target in a line, in an order. So I challenge all you show riders to be able to do this with your Highland ponies. They're very well behaved, and they are very well mannered, and in fact probably one of the biggest compliments I get when people come to visit regularly is just how well mannered our ponies are and how well behaved they are. But they have to for the job that they're doing. Plus, when we go in with the Queen, they have to be very well mannered. And on that note, my last image here is just a picture of a couple of our foals and Sponge. Sponge, who is our extra member of the team, who also knows when the camera is watching her. So I'd just like to thank you all for your attention, and I hope it's been of interest to you. And I would like to thank Katie and Dengie again for inviting us to do this talk. So thank you.
Brilliant, Sylvia, thank you. And I know you're going to be staying around, and obviously what you do is very much the breeding side, and it feeds into the ponies working on the hill. But also Lizzie then has the challenge, I guess, of creating some show ponies as well. Hi, Lizzie.
So I'd just like to echo what Sylvia said. Thank you so much for asking us both to talk. I love how passionate you are and Dengie are about the rare breeds and the native ponies especially, and it's an honour working with you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to lead beautifully into the first slide, and we're going to do this session as a bit of a sort of Q&A. So in terms of talking about the particular case studies we've got, so obviously Balmoral Leia is clearly one of the Balmoral Highlands, and I think there's some Freddie leading her in, but can you tell us a little bit about her? And obviously we've highlighted that temperament is key for you, obviously just as much as it is for Sylvia as well.
Yeah, so what I like working with these ponies is that now, because I've been doing some of these Balmoral ponies since 1999, it's all very interesting to work with the family. So Sylvia has obviously bred generations of them, and this is I had her mother, so I rode her mother, Balmoral Melody, and her aunt, and Leia is by beautiful Lord, who Sylvia sadly lost. So I feel so privileged to have her. And temperament is absolute key to me, because if you haven't got a good temperament or a calm demeanor, they're not trainable, and you can't do anything with them. And at these county shows, they are so electric. There's so much going on that they have got to have good temperaments. And I'm too old now to be messing around with bad tempered animals, and I've learned over the years that you put all this effort in, you get them to horse the ear show, they can't cope with the atmosphere, and there's just no point to it. And you know, are particularly lucky with the ones that come from Sylvia, because they are so well trained, well handled, they're easy. So it makes our job to get them in the ring and get them under saddle so much easier. And, you know, if you go up to Balmoral to see Sylvia, you can walk in with 2-year-old colts and, you know, you're never worried, they're never going to attack you. You know, all her young stock are well behaved, and it is so important.
What age would you receive them typically from Sylvia? Do you have a preference for a particular stage, or is it down to the individual and their sort of characteristics?
Sylvia's pretty good at working out when they're ready to come, or, you know, if she's got one that she thinks do a good ridden job. She's always right when she, you know, when she sends them, she knows when the right time is. Some come different, you know. Leia came as a 3-year-old, and it's quite interesting because obviously she was bred at Balmoral, and, you know, in this photo you can see she is quite lardy. I mean, she will live on fresh air because she was used to you know, a tough environment up there. You know, they're proper natives, and coming down to the sunny south, she didn't grow a winter coat. She came down in the autumn and was obviously waiting for this winter to come that didn't come, and lives off fresh air, which is, you know, challenging at times.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? They shouldn't even feel the need to grow the coat, but and that's, you can see why then if we do bring them south, it is very easy for them to become overweight quite quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, so how old is she now? Is she in work and ridden?
Yes, so she's rising 5. So we don't like to push the ponies. I don't like to push them, especially the Highlands. I personally don't think they're ready mentally or physically to be going out trawled round the ridden classes as 4-year-olds. I think she's particularly special. So she was backed at 4 and is now going nicely under saddle. So we'll bring her out this year to do novices.
And how many sorts of shows, classes and things would you typically do with her at that age?
So we wouldn't push her. So she would maybe 5 ridden classes, you know, this season, and then we'd wait to next season to aim her at the qualifiers. You know, we don't push them, not with their limbs. Highlands are big-bodied animals, and I think training wise, you know, I don't like to bore them. They don't want to be going around the school. They want to go out and about. The good thing about Leia is that she's been to a few shows in hand, so she hasn't been overshown in hand, so she's not bored. But, you know, hopefully she'll come out fresh and happy.
Yeah, and she has a little bit of experience of what it's all about
Yeah,
at the show. Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll move on to Balmoral Georgia, and I think there's quite a story to this one.
yeah.
The slides and the pictures probably give us a hint as to how dramatic it might have been, but tell us what happened. And I think this came down to instinct and experience kicking in, and taking action.
So normally Sylvia does all the breeding in Scotland, so it wouldn't be something normally that I do. It was that we've got Balmoral Mandarin down south, and I've had beautiful Balmoral Gemini. So we thought, you know, we'd breed a foal. Unfortunately, this little one got pneumonia at a few days old, and was very, very poorly. I think the lucky thing was we got it, and the vets, it was right in the middle of lockdown, and I think because, you know, it was 2020, it was April, and I think the vets weren't busy and were just taking emergencies, and they threw everything at it because they didn't know whether it was bacterial or viral, and she had very little chance of survival. But I think luckily Gemini, her mum, has done pageants at Windsor. She's very quiet, so she didn't mind all the wires or the tubes or anything, which I think helped a lot.
And what was she able to suckle the foal and things, or were you having to use sort of milk replacers and things? Like what?
Yeah, so they were both, but they were using milk replacers as well. They were incredible. They even gave a Viagra because apparently it makes the blood flow through the lungs as well, but they threw everything at it. There were lots of tears our end because, you know, she was obviously special, so they threw everything at it. And she has the most beautiful temperament as well. So yeah, we're really lucky.
I think it helps, doesn't it, when you're that closely involved with something that's poorly, and you need a mare that can cope with it and not cause more problems by almost being over anxious. So if I go to the next slide, I think we have the after sort of shots, don't we? So
yeah, that was her last year competing at Windsor Horse Show, and going back to temperament, it was her first show, because obviously a lot of the shows were cancelled. So as a yearling, she was in with all the adults, and she finished 5th in a huge class, so we were absolutely chuffed.
And what were you feeding her at this point in time to sort of get her from, obviously once she was over the worst and back to you from the hospital and things, what did you sort of feed her from there?
So she had buckets and buckets full of Dengie alpha oil because she needed, you know, a lot of weight on. Normally we don't have the problem with the Highlands, but she is small. She's smaller than her brother, so we've got a full brother who's big and uptight, so she is small, but she's nice. She's a nice girl.
And I think, is this what with her in the ring, was it with against the adults, did you say?
Yeah, so that was, and that's layer behind her, so yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? But and how's she looking now, because obviously that was last year? Is she catching up, do you feel, in terms of height and development and things?
Yeah, so I don't think she'll be huge, but she's got a lot of heart room and she's grown on a lot, and she is a darling, but she has grown on, but she won't be big. I mean, no. She's not a big girl.
And you likely to show her at Windsor again this year? I'm thinking next year, but it's this year, isn't it? 2022 or?
So no, because she's got a full brother who is quite special. So he was born on what would have been the Duke of Edinburgh's centenary birthday. So he's called Balmoral Duke. So we're hoping to show him this year at the horse show. So I don't think I'd want to put them against each other. Plus 2-year-olds is quite a tough age.
So she'll be sort of rested in inverted commas from the showring for a little bit, and then
we will show her, but I just I wouldn't want to put her against her brother.
So that's fair enough. Okay, brilliant. Well, we're going to move to some other breeds and types, because we've sort of focused on the Highlands so far, but I know obviously you're very experienced producing lots of different native breeds and also judging them as well. So we have Blackthorn Panther. Perhaps if you want to tell us a little bit about him and maybe some of the sort of differences between the different breeds and what you're looking for when you're producing them.
So I like my ponies, as a judge and a producer, I like them to be able to do the job that they were bred to do. I like them to be true to type, and you know, regardless of their breed, I always want to see them go forward. I want them balanced, and I want them to go in a way fitting with their breed. So I've always wanted an Exmoor. My mum actually bought this pony for Freddie in 2020, and a few weeks later had a very, very bad bleed on her brain. So I lent him, I didn't want to sell him, so I lent him to a friend last year, and he had an incredible season. But finishing 5th at Horsea Show in the juniors, being the only placed Exmoor. But I also like my ponies not to just do showing. I like them to be versatile, and he does dressage, he does pony club, he does a bit of everything, but you know, he is still true to type.
He looks very handsome, and I guess it's, you know, with a native breed, it's finding the balance, isn't it? And as a nutritionist, we're always trying to work with trying to get a healthy horse, but the one that can perform and be successful at whatever job it is it's doing. So what's your thinking when you're looking at animals in the show ring, particularly as a judge, in terms of if they're sort of overweight, underweight? How do you sort of weight that, weight the weight in terms of whether you put them up or not?
So I don't like over fat animals. I mean, he's a tricky one, because you know, these ponies are bred to live in tough, uncompromising conditions. You know, they're hardy ponies, but he just lives off fresh air, you know. He does take, so I've got him back now, and he does take some getting fit. But he just, you know, he looks at food and he puts on weight. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't like fat ponies, you know. I like them to look fit, but native ponies, they are, it is hard, it is really tough, because they are bred you know, to live. I mean, we've seen the ponies at Balmoral up to their bellies in snow. That's what they're bred to do, and they have got to have some food inside them, but it's keeping a happy balance, you know.
Yeah. And is he very laid back as well? I mean, he's kind of it looks like he's versatile, and obviously children riding him and things. I'm guessing he'd be quite capable of taking adults as well, but
yeah,
he goes off with children riding, no problem at all. And
so the tricky thing I find, because you know, I'm 9.5 stone, with tack and with my riding gear on, you know, that's another half a stone at least. So I don't feel bad about riding him, because he takes a 5'9" rug, so he is a real chunky monkey, and he could take me, you know, all day long, you know. So it's easy to share him, you know, with my 7-year-old son. You know, he's fun, and it's easier that way. I do find it with the other breeds that are smaller, I find it hard to set them up, because obviously a 7-year-old isn't capable of schooling, you know, his own ponies. So that's why I particularly enjoy him.
It's great. And again, it's a rare native breed that is so versatile as a sort of proper family pony, isn't it? You can sort of mums and daughters or sons or whatever can share them, which you know, in the modern world becomes more and more appealing when we're all so busy and time poor. Having a breed that you can actually share, when one's busy, the other one can be riding and so on. It's
yeah,
it really makes the case for them. Shall we move on to Freddie and in action?
yep.
Here he is.
So being a boy, I wanted him to have, I learned to ride on Dartmoors. I love Dartmoors, but I want him to have fun. I don't want him to be stressed. I don't want to have a pony that I've got to lunge for an hour before he gets on it. And I love Dartmoors. I think they're real kind, fun little ponies.
Beautiful as well. So Cadbury Hot Shots showing success, and again versatile, does everything.
So he's done really well. I've seen him around the shows. I've watched him being ridden in by his little jockey, you know, because he, you know, he's small, he would not take my weight. And I'm lucky that he's been there, he's done it. He's got the t-shirt. So, and all I get is Freddie saying, come on, I want to ride Stevie, you know, I want to ride Stevie, which is great, because, you know, it's not all about just going to shows and winning rosettes. It's all about children enjoying the ponies. And Amelia, who had the Exmoor last year, but she, you know, her face, her smile, and I think that as a judge, I like to see the kids looking happy. I don't like them looking tense or stressed, and I think that's a great thing about, you know, our native ponies. I think they're kind.
What's the sort of most common, if there is such a thing, like the most common error or mistake, do you think, when you're judging and around the country and things? What's one of the most common issues that people sort of perhaps make as errors that gets them marked down?
I think probably not preparing enough, and I think probably getting the wrong pony rider combination. And my pet hate is, I think a lot of people think they have to have a stallion to win, and I think it's fine, you know, if you've got stallions that are well kept, that are bred from and happy. But I think, you know, you're better off having a happy gelding than just keeping a pony entie that's never going to cover a mare just for the shows. That's something that I'm not a fan of.
And I think we've got another Dartmoor, haven't we, to look at. So this is Rashfield Honeybee. Do you think, I mean, are Dartmoors pretty consistent in temperament and things? Are they a good go-to breed for someone if they were starting out with natives and rare breeds?
Yeah, I mean, I love Dartmoors. I think they're very honest, they're very versatile. I'm lucky, you know, this is my little boy, will do lead reins on her this season. He's not experienced enough to go straight in first wins on her, so I've got a very, very established jockey that rides her as well, who's done really well with her. So, you know, it's quite exciting for me, this one.
And if there was a parent out there wanting to do sort of lead rein showing for the first time with their child, what would be your sort of top pieces of advice for you sort of getting started and having a go with something like that?
I would think, you know, my main advice was to get a suitable pony, you know, a sensible pony, so you can have a nice day. I think it's sad when you see children terrified or not enjoying themselves or nervous. And I think as a mother, if you're inexperienced, the last thing you want to go to a show, you know, is to worry about your child's safety. So I think buying the right pony is the most important thing, temperament wise and experience wise. You know, if you're a novice, you don't want to get a novice, you know, get something with a few miles on the clock that's established, and get help from a professional, just going for lessons or asking advice, you know.
Yeah, and is it worth joining, you know, breed society or something like the Dartmoor Pony and or Exmoor Pony Society, whichever breed you're going for? Are they good places to start for specific sort of knowledge and information about the breeds? Is that the logical place?
I think a lot of the breed shows are a great place to start, because they have lots of classes, lots of fun classes where the pressure's off, where you don't have qualifiers, you know, where the children can have a go at almost anything. Yeah,
excellent. And is there anything about Honeybee that stands out for you when we see her in these images? As a judge, what would you be looking for in something? Why would she catch your eye, I guess?
So I love her. She's very, very feminine. I like a mare to be feminine, you know. I like a stallion to look masculine, or a gelding to look masculine, but I think she's very feminine. She's very deep, and you know, she's got a lovely temperament, but she's a great mover. She's got a bit of star quality, and I think she looks happy, you know. She's always got this happy expression, and I think that's quite important. She looks like she wants to be looked at, and we're lucky because she went to the Royal Highlands as a youngster, so she was shown in hand, not over shown in hand, but she's seen a bit of life, so she's quite confident.
It's always I find it very hard to articulate what is that sort of X factor, isn't it? But just they seem to have a presence. Yeah. It's just I want you to look at me, as you say, and that's even in the sort of more relaxed shot at home or whatever. It's just how they stand, isn't it? They just command your attention somehow, and you can see, and when you get one with a good temperament as well, because sometimes it comes with that presence can come with a bit of a too much character. Yeah. Of us finding something that's got a presence without the sort of too much of it is rare, isn't it? But
yeah,
it looks super. I think we'll move on because I'm conscious of time, and you and Sylvia are giving up so much of your evening, but we have the last slide, and sort of last but not least, I think, in the native pony breeds. But tell us about Bellissima, please.
So Sharptail Bellissima, I judged her a lot, and I just, the moment I saw this Shetland, I fell in love with her. Beautiful eyes, star quality, such charisma, and I absolutely fell in love with her. I judged the Royal International with Matthew Lawrence, and we had her to win, and I approached her owner stroke breeder and said, you know, if ever you want to sell her, please let me know, because Freddie was then 3. And he said, I don't want to sell her because I want to breed from her, but you're welcome to borrow her. So I borrowed her. She took Freddie to Horse the Year show on the lead rein, and she is just the most beautiful girl. She's made a lot of children happy, brought a lot of them on, and an absolute darling. And the lovely thing is now that she's back and will be breeding, she's back with her owner after he kindly let us have her for 3 wonderful seasons. So
fantastic. And you know, Shetlands can be characters and sometimes get a lot of you know, sort of or stereotyped or typecast as little sort of naughty imps at times. But would you recommend people starting when you've got, as you say, like a 3-year-old child? Would you recommend starting with a Shetland? And do you have well, would you counter the prejudices, I suppose, that some people might have about Shetlands?
No, I love I love our native breeds, and I think children love Shetlands. And Freddie bathed her himself, got her ready, you know, when he did the lead rein on her at the International, he bathed her himself, and he was 4. So, you know, I love them. I can't speak highly. As a judge, I love them as well. I don't mind what breed I have, as long as they've got nice temperaments and they're true to type. So yeah, I'm a huge Shetland fan.
And what would you, so obviously she's again probably more mature and a sort of established sort of show pony. What sort of things would you be feeding her on when she went to boys and at that level?
So depending on the level of work, but she had buckets and buckets of hi-fi light, because she was, you know, quite a good girl. When she was traveling, I'd up it and maybe give her, because I do like the alpha oil, especially on the blacks, because it comes through, because I'm not a huge fan of lots and lots of products. I always feed good quality hay along with the food, because I think they shine from the inside out, and I think, you know, it's fair enough squirting this on, squirting that one, but as soon as they've worked or they sweat, it all comes off. Whereas I think with the right feed and everything, they shine from within. It's also hard, because obviously you don't want to heat up the little ponies, so, you know, there's got to be a happy balance there. But I love a bit of oil. I love the alpha oil because of the shine it gives them.
Yeah, no, she looks lovely, and it, like you say, it's exactly that, a good balanced diet and the oil, and it comes from within, and actually then you don't need so much either elbow grease or topical things to put on the top. But
yeah,
that's brilliant. Thank you, Lizzie. You're probably going to shoot me because I found this picture of you both. It's the one photo I could find with you both in a shot and the camera, and I think it was when you were being interviewed by Claire, and her name's just gone out of my head. BBC
Claire Baldwin, wasn't it?
Thank you, Claire Baldwin, at Windsor for something. So yes, it was just to say, because I actually had you both in one shot, but thank you. And then if I'm going to stop sharing and try and just have a look at the chat. So if you're happy to come back on, Sylvia, if you're there, we'll see if there's any questions. Somebody did say, could I ask Lizzie what she feeds her good doer ponies? So I'm not sure if that probably came in a little bit maybe before we'd just talked about that, but if there's anything you want to add on the feeding the good
yes. So the Exmoor, he has healthy hooves, molasses free. So that's what he has. Or Hi-Fi Light. I do love the Hi-Fi Light, especially for the little ponies as well, with alphabet.
Lovely. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat while you're answering that. So that's brilliant. Somebody asked what food sources copper naturally found in, asking as an owner of Dartmoor. Well, it's a really good point actually, because the sort of plants reflect the soils they're grown on, and in the UK our soils are very low in things like selenium and copper. So it is one of the minerals that we don't tend to have high levels of coming through in the forages we use. So that's why we would tend to recommend, I don't know if you'd basically call it sort of inorganic sources. So things like minerals mined from the ground would be your copper sulfates, things like that. They're added to feeds, they're added to supplements and balances and licks and things. So it's basically you're pretty much having to use those sources. You can get higher levels in things like seaweed, but again, because it's a natural product, it will vary. So we don't tend to rely on it, particularly when you've got a definitive requirement for a breeding animal, because the levels will be a little bit up and down. So that tends to be why we have to use the other things, which I think, Tracy, you've also answered that. Thank you behind the scenes there. Are there any more questions? Anyone else come up with anything? If not, I think Tracy's been answering some nutritional ones for us anyway, which is great. In that case, then, I would like to say thank you very much to Lizzie and Sylvia. I think in the absence of actually being together in person, we can't give you a massive round of applause, which I'm sure everyone would be doing. And I know that the comments and thank yous will be coming through in the chat box, as they do every time we do these webinars. But I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much for giving up your time. And it's just brilliant at Dengie that we get to work with such fantastic people. And just to reiterate that your enthusiasm and passion has come across yet again so well, and you're great ambassadors for the breeds and the discipline. And it goes without saying, if you work for the royal household, it's a mark of your professionalism for sure. We will be sending some thank yous to you, because we can't show our appreciation right now, so they will come in the post in the next couple of days. But if there's no other questions, I think there's just lots of thank yous coming in, so I will just check. Oh, hang on, now there are some actual questions coming in. That's so typical, sorry. Lots of thank yous. What is, we'll answer these ones while we can. What age is the best for putting a Welsh bee in foal? That's probably $1 million question. Anyone want to answer that one?
I think that's Sylvia.
I would actually say that on the grand scale of a level of anything that is going to breed, any pony that's going to breed, I would go into that mediocre place of possibly 4 or 5 years old. No earlier, unless it's a particularly good doer that is going to struggle to keep the weight off. And at times the best thing to do, in the natural, it would get pregnant early because it's thriving. If it's a 3-year-old and it's running with a stallion, it will become pregnant and it will naturally keep itself on that balance. So you got to maybe think to yourself, am I going to struggle keeping weight off this pony's back? So if I do, would it be an idea to actually breed from it early? But is it well enough grown? Has it finished developing itself before you then actually put it to the stallion? So there's a few factors there. But for example, if I had a 3-year-old filly that was doing really, really well as a Highland pony, but it had, it was formed, had width and depth, and it was all going in the right direction, I wouldn't have a problem putting it to the stallion at 3, because I know that by the time it's 4, I'm going to have to put it on a dark paddock and hunger it, because it's going to struggle to so the best place for it to be is to be naturally breeding.
Yeah, absolutely, using its energy.
I hope that's answered that question.
Yes, it has. No, that's brilliant. I think most of the rest we've got are in the Q&A, so they're sort of nutrition-y ones. So again, we'll cover those off because it's things about EMS and that. So we'll respond to those tomorrow from the feed lines. But just thank you both again. There's so many thank you messages. Everyone's loved it. It's been wonderful to see such happy ponies and beautifully cared for. Unfortunately, when I end the webinar, I cut everyone off. So I'm going to have to say bye, Lizzie, bye, Sylvia, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, audience, for your questions. And yeah, if there's anything, do get in touch with us on the feed line tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.